Okay, ladies, let's talk about sex when you're single. Your sexuality, because your sexuality does not begin when you get married. You are a sexual being now, even while you're single. And I think there's been a lot of toxic teaching in churches about this. So when we had our Ask Us Anything recently, a whole ton of you submitted questions about what do I do with my sexuality while I am single? Like, how do I handle that? And there's a lot of these questions that I thought, my goodness, I have no idea what to say. Like, God help me. But I just want to talk about it because I think there's been a lot of really harmful teachings on this topic. So let's just get started. Let's dive right in. One of you wrote, does struggling with masturbation when you're young mean that you're not pure for marriage anymore? Like you're no longer saved for your spouse? Okay, this idea of being pure and saved before marriage is one of those teachings that I think is unhelpful. It may have sounded good at the initial time. I know I thought about it this way all the time growing up in the 90s and purity culture, and my Eliana girl is awake. And I think there's been a lot of unhelpful messaging in the church, messaging that's been downright shameful. The messaging that you're only pure if you've saved sex till marriage, or staying pure until marriage, saving yourself until marriage, gives this idea that our sexual history, that our sexuality is what determines if we're pure or not. And that it kind of is our whole identity, like saving yourself for marriage. No, I'm sorry, like there's a whole lot more to you than sex. There's a whole lot more that you bring to a marriage. So whether or not you've had sex before marriage does not determine whether or not you have saved yourself for your husband. Also, like staying pure until marriage, like I'm sorry, purity is not his. If you look at the biblical idea of being right with God, it's what he has done and not what we have done. And I think it just like gets away from the heart of the gospel when we say like purity. Does struggling with masturbation when you're young mean that you're not pure anymore for marriage? I would say absolutely not. That is not what that means. I know there's a lot of pressure in Christian circles, like masturbation is wrong, masturbation is wrong. And I've always kind of been like, but why? Like, can it be wrong? Sure. Basically anything we do can be done in a way that's healthy or a way that's unhealthy. If you were my little sister sitting here with me, I would not, or one of my daughters, I would not say to you that I thought masturbation was wrong before marriage. I say that hesitantly because I also wouldn't be like, go do it. Yes. I think there are great Christian thinkers who go on either side of that. There are some Christian psychologists who would say that masturbation is a great way to help you save sex for marriage and still have some release. There are other great Christian thinkers who would say, no, it is absolutely wrong. And you see people on both sides. The Bible does not lay down a boundary here. Like there's one story in the Bible that some would say talks about masturbation. It's the story of Onan. And we break that story down in our video called Is Masturbation Even Wrong? Which is linked below. We talk all through that story. It really has nothing to do with masturbation. So this is one of those areas that I think reasonable minds can differ. And I think a lot of it has to do with how you are approaching this. There's so many things in life that how we approach them is the thing that matters. What's going on in our heart? Jesus was all about our heart and issues. And so I would actually recommend in this book, Sex Looks in the City by Kat Harris, who you might know as The Refined Woman. She has, I think it's 2 chapters dedicated to talking about masturbation from a biblical perspective. And this is the most nuanced approach I have ever heard. And I was cheering her on as I read those chapters. Like, this is the best approach I've heard to explaining masturbation for single people. Okay, I'm back. Hi, different day. Still Ellie girl here. I got some feedback on the video and just wanted to clarify the reason I'm sharing all of this with you about masturbation is because I see so many emails and comments come in from people who are bound in shame and guilt because they masturbate. And from my perspective, like as an outside observer looking in, like this is not something, like the Bible is very clear, like murder is wrong, stealing is wrong. And this is not along those same lines, but is treated like it is within church. And so I think we live under guilt and shame that isn't always warranted, that isn't always even meant to be there, and sometimes comes from messaging as opposed to committing an actual sin, if that makes sense. So I'm not trying to say it's a free-for-all, masturbate, blah, blah, blah. What I'm trying to say is like, there's a whole lot of nuance here. There's a whole lot of gray, and you got to dig into your reasons behind this, like how it's approached. Like there's a whole lot to dig into. So we actually I heard back from the author of that Sexless in the City book, Kat Harris. She is going to come on my podcast, which is the Friday videos about growing the good Christian girl. And we are going to talk all about masturbation as a single person who wants to honor God. And we're just going to have a whole conversation about it on the podcast. So we'll talk about this more then. Okay, second question. I didn't save myself till marriage and broke up with a bad boyfriend. Now I deeply regret giving so much of myself to him. How will no one marry me or respect me? And I would say, like, it breaks my heart to hear these questions. And I know so many of us have them. They're so common because of the messaging we've heard in church. But like, it breaks my heart to hear this shame and this sense of like being lost because of a sexual past. And sex is not yourself. There's a huge difference there. We need to separate the two. Maybe you didn't save sex for marriage, but that doesn't mean that yourself is lost. A bad relationship and things that you've done in your past that you wish you hadn't done, that does not change that you are worthy of respect. It doesn't change who you are as someone who is valued and loved by God and should be treated with the utmost respect. If you find a guy and he does not treat you with respect, get out. You are worth more than that. Like, if he shames you or doesn't treat you with respect because of your past, he is not the one for you. Like, leave. You are worth more than that. And so, no, that has not changed your worth. It has not changed your value. It has not changed who you are. I just want us to get away from this idea that it has. It makes me so mad. I don't want my girls to grow up with that, which brings me to another question. Do you worry about raising your girls in church since there's a lot of toxic teachings within it? I don't want my kids to have to deal with some of that shame that has taken me a while to get out of. I relate to that question so much. I've talked to James about how I'm so afraid of, like, what are they going to learn about God in church that I'm going to have to unteach them, or that I won't know that they learned until later and it manifests itself. But I've also realized, like, there's going to be brokenness no matter where they grow up. And learning how to work through that and how to delineate between helpful and toxic messages, that's a huge part of becoming an adult, because no matter where we are in any situation, we'll be hearing things that are not true or are not helpful. And so if church is a place that they can start to learn that, then that will prepare them well. It will mean a lot of conversations at home to follow up with stuff that they're hearing in church. And I also am going to choose a church that's the healthiest I can find and not put them in a cult-like situation if possible. One of you wrote in, I'm a sexual person. I'm waiting until marriage to have sex, but I struggle because I love talking about it. I love hearing people's experiences. I had to stop myself from making a playlist. Girl, I hear you. How do I handle this? I'm single as a dollar bill and I don't know what to do. Should I stop learning about sex? I think that for some people, that could be a great way to handle your sexuality before marriage, is learning about it. You know yourself best. Be aware of, is this helping me? Is this making me too obsessed with it? But for me, like, I wanted to learn about it and I'm glad I did. And honestly, I wish I had felt the freedom from shame to have more conversations about it than I even did. Someone else wrote, are romance novels and movies beneficial or harmful during a time of singleness? Similar answer. You know yourself best. For me personally, I found that watching chick flicks at one point in my singleness just made me so sad and feeling hopeless about where I was and if I'd ever find someone. And so for a while, I stopped watching chick flicks. That was my personal conviction of what I needed to do to help myself stay healthy. Another thing that I did all throughout my singleness was I daydream about meeting someone and being held by that person. And I used to feel so guilty for that. And now I wish someone had sat me down and said, that's normal. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with you imagining that. Like, I wasn't even imagining sex. I wasn't even imagining anything inappropriate. And I just, holding a guy's hand or him hugging me or whatever. And I felt so much shame about that for years. And for one person, they might be convicted not to do that. For another, they might just feel shame because I always thought, don't have guy-girl relationships. They're wrong. Someone else wrote, what can someone with a sexually abusive past do to work through stuff before the wedding night? Counseling. That is the biggest thing. Counseling, and also knowing your triggers and talking with your future spouse about them. Talking about, here are some things that trigger me. And you're not going to know all your triggers before you get married. Things will come up down the road. But if your spouse knows and understands where you're coming from and can work with you and walk with you through them to say like, what can I do in that moment to be with you? Or we might just need to take a step back if I'm really triggered, and your spouse knowing that and being okay with that, knowing it ahead of time, that is huge. So have those conversations with your counselor and with your spouse. Okay, we're gonna pretty much leave it there, but just know that you're not alone. So many of you wrote in saying, how do I deal with sexual desire as someone who wants to save sex for marriage and wants to honor God? And I think that answer is gonna look different for different people. There's this passage that Paul wrote that's like, eating food offered to idols for one person is against their convictions and they should not do it. And for another person is totally fine and it's okay for them to do. And I think there's a lot of gray areas. Like the Bible really does not talk a lot about sexuality before marriage. And so there's a lot of gray here. I think using wisdom and knowing yourself is huge. Getting advice from people you trust. But I would say pay attention to the fruit of those things in your life. Jesus said, you know a tree by the fruit it bears. So is this something that you feel is getting between you and God? If so, take a step back. Ask, is that because of shameful messages that I grew up with? Or is that because of this particular behavior that I'm choosing to do? Whoa, Ellie got the stand. Hello. She wants to eat it. I wouldn't rush into anything, but just take your time, explore, read this book, see what you think of it. You might agree with some things and not with others. It's linked down below. And I hope that can help. Comment below anything you'd add to this conversation. Whew, this was a tough one, but I love these questions and I love talking about this with you all. Bye.